Good evening. My name is Angel McKissick. I'm the director of the Damon J Center for Civil Rights here at Wayne State University Law School.
That's horrible.
I'm so pleased to welcome you all. Everyone, good evening.
Hello. My God. Those who already talked to me tonight know I am battling a massive migraine. So please bear with me if I'm scatterbrained and my energy is low. I also want to make a few disclaimers. We have video, audio, and we're live streaming. So just if you don't want to say anything, that's going to be recorded because we are recording this and people are watching it in real time on YouTube. So just want to be transparent about that. And also, if you don't want camera guy, just tell him like, don't don't look at my face. Just saying, because we had that at the last event. Someone didn't want to be on camera, which is totally fine. Just let them know. Okay. Right. So first, and I'm really glad I wrote my notes because I have zero intellectual capacity with this headache. So bear with me. Um, a little bit about the lecture briefly. Some of you have been to the Keats Center and maybe this event several times, and some of you might be totally brand new. So I wanted to provide a little history and context. So this is the 9th biennial lecture. The lecture actually started as a flagship program of the African American Collection of Legal History, which was founded by the late Professor Edward J. Littlejohn. And the goal of the lecture is to invite, the most innovative and sharpest thinkers from across disciplines to inform our collective understanding of the contemporary fight for civil rights, democracy, and power. The lecture has featured really brilliant, esteemed speakers. Most recently, in 2023, Dr. Rhonda Williams. If you were here for that, you know how powerful that was. The lecture has also hosted Connie Rice, Harry Belafonte, Julian Bond, among others. And so we are very excited to welcome tonight's speaker into that special club. Dr. Lester Spence, Professor of Political Science and Africana Studies at Johns Hopkins. But before we get to Dr. Spence, there's a few acknowledgments in order. The first acknowledgement is for you all, for being here. I'm very mindful that there are many people, that work, crises, et cetera, that are competing for your time and your energy. And I really appreciate that you're making a decision to come here at the end of the week, at the end of the day, to use your brain and listen to political content, like to be willing to critically engage with what we have to say tonight. And so I don't want to let that go unacknowledged, that most people right now, when they don't have to be at work, they'd just rather be at home recovering from the news cycle or from the demands of their job. So I really thank you for being here and showing up and engaging with us tonight. I also have to acknowledge the co-sponsors for the event, which are the Departments of African American Studies and Political Science here at Wayne State, and also my colleagues, Peter and Pallavi, who help. Anybody who does events knows the logistics, coordination, food, the technology, etc. is a job, and it's a job that many people hold. So shout out to them. So a little bit, if you allow me, I wouldn't be a good director if I didn't shout out the center and its work. The center started in 2011 to honor Judge Keats' legacy. And this lecture is part of doing that. To quote the judge, he said that his hope for the center was that it would, quote, make a difference in the fight for freedom in this country, which is a broad charge, of course, right? And especially in this moment. So to that end, the mission of the center is to carry forward the judge's legacy through pro-democracy, advocacy and education, community-centered journalism, and narrative shifting, and racial equity leadership development that challenges systemic oppression. So all of our work is guided by the judges over 50 years, right, of judicial service and commitment to justice. And for the past 13 years, we have been trying to fulfill this mission through three main projects, the longest running being the Detroit Equity Action Lab's Racial Equity Fellowship. DEAL for short. I am an alumni of the 6th cohort of that program, and they will be actually welcoming their 10th cohort in January. And the DEAL is a 12-month cohort-based fellowship that supports local leaders, both emerging and established leaders, in cultivating a critical consciousness of the economic, social, psychological, and spatial costs of structural racism, and equips those leaders to disrupt those regimes of harm and construct more just policies, practices, and cultures in its place. And some of the DEAL staff are here today. They just had a session with their current cohort too. So shout out to them. The applications are closed for next year, but they open in August of next year. So if you are interested or you know someone who might be interested in the program, there's more information out on the tables there. Additionally, we also are home to the Race and Justice Reporting Initiative that is directed by Martina Guzman. And this time last year, maybe, or maybe a little bit earlier, within the last year or so, Martina launched an incredible innovation, and it's called Verdad. It is an AI-powered monitoring tool that listens to streaming media and flags emerging mis and disinformation in real time. This is an open source tool and anyone can visit it. You can go to verdad.app and create an account, and you can effectively monitor mis and disinformation. Right now, it's only working with Spanish language radio, but the technology can work with anything that streams, including podcasts and YouTube. So we're very excited to have that project here at the Keats Center, and to see how it is going to grow into its second phase. So I have to shout out Martina, who's not here, and uplift her work. And then lastly, we are building out our newest initiative, which is the Detroit Democracy Project. That project is in its infancy. However, we are planning, and it will involve a robust civic literacy agenda and resources and tools for organizers, et cetera, and a bunch of stuff yet to be imagined. So you can find out about all that stuff with the flyers on the table in the front. You can also follow our social media and subscribe to the newsletter, because we'll be dropping all of the announcements, launches, information there. So that's my commercial for the Keith Center. Next, I would like to invite the acting dean of the law school, Lance Gable, to share a few remarks with us. If any of you know about Wayne State stuff, the interim president of the university is our dean, but is interim president right now as they find a permanent president. So Dean Gable is here representing the law school, and he's here to welcome you with a few remarks before we see Dr. Spence. So please welcome him with me.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here. I want to thank Director McKissick for bearing with all of the stresses that come with putting together such an important event, and doing that and everything else she does in a wonderfully amazing and inspirational way. And I really appreciate her. I really appreciate everyone who's been working with the Keats Center, and I appreciate all of you for being here tonight. Well, it's my honor on behalf of the law school to welcome you here for our biennial Damon J. Keats Center for Civil Rights lecture. This is something that it's really one of the most, I think it's one of the most important events we have here at the law school, because every time it gives us an opportunity not only to put forward really important issues and to bring in speakers who can inspire us to fight for justice and democracy and all of the many other things we need to be inspired to fight for now in this moment. But it's also a way to consistently reaffirm our connection to the legacy of Judge Keith. So I want to extend a warm welcome to Dr. Spence for being here and being part of that helping us to extend that legacy. We're deeply grateful for his his presence here tonight, and for the ideas that he'll be sharing with us. I know that one of the themes of the discussion tonight is going to be the role of imagination in this political era, and it's a theme that is especially urgent given what's going on in our country and in the world right now. The moment we're living in right now is posing extraordinary challenges for our communities, for our country, for our political system, for our legal system. And you know, we're facing political polarization. We're facing an environmental crisis. We're facing social inequity that, in many ways, has been made worse by the pandemic and other events of recent years. There's deep concern about the future of our democracy. And so this is a really important time to be coming together and continuing to think about the future and thinking about how we can move forward together into that future. Being here at a law school, I think, is particularly important because law is a vital tool for building that future. Anytime we think about the role that law can play in our society, oftentimes law falls short. But one of the things that we try to teach our law students here at Wayne State is that you're here to get a legal education, not only so you can go out and practice law, which of course is very important and a very important outcome of that education, but you're also here to ensure that you have a deeper understanding of the role that law can play in the world. And you know, law is not only a tool that shapes our society, but it's a tool. It's an aspect of our society that's constantly evolving, and it's meant to evolve. And understanding how law shapes our society can help us reframe it, reshape it to get to that better society that we want. And so I think it's an important responsibility of law schools and of universities to be part of that process. Not only a process of education, but a process of encouraging civil and moral understanding that can lead us to a better world, a place where we can protect our democracy and we can seek justice. So as we gather here tonight for this lecture, I know we'll all be inspired, and I know we can embrace the spirit of Judge Keith, who not only dared to imagine a more just world, but who dared to think of how the law could help to build that more just world. So I want to thank you all again for being here and to join me in welcoming Dr. Spence. I think Director McKissick is going to come back up and share a few more remarks. Just thank you for being here for this important event and this important evening, and to have these important conversations as we move forward.
Screen. Okay, hold on. I don't want to touch anything because I'm like, we may have to just deal with looking at ourselves up there. Something always goes haywire at an event. It don't matter how prepared you are, because I was for sure like, boom, we got it. Anyway, thank you. Thank you for the remarks. Thank you for coming. I won't hold you too much more before Dr. Spence comes up. I do want to frame the conversation in the lecture really quickly. The impetus for the topic. Lester and I have been in pretty intense conversations past 12 months, just informal, talking about everything, but really digging down on what's the challenges that are in front of us, particularly post January 20th. And what's needed. So what's needed in terms of infrastructure, what's needed from institutions, but really what's needed in thought. So what new ideas, what new theories are needed to meet the moment, but also to be able to grow and be more expansive beyond the moment, right? And we were specifically talking about the role of universities in cultivating those new ideas and those new theories. And so I just wanted to say a few things about that before we start. Contrary to maybe how many universities are operating now, universities are supposed to be a public good. And we know that famously, universities are under acute attack right now by our own government. And so those of us who are inside the university have an obligation to protect the university's role as a public good and to protect its presence in the public sphere. People have called this a moment, right? As if we're going to go back or something, but we're in a paradigm shifting era. And there will be a pre and post. Like there's not going to be a clean reversal. And so that means, right, if we appreciate that we're in a paradigm shifting moment, we should double down on the university's role as a central node of power and knowledge production. And it means that we must position ourselves to leverage everything we know across our disciplines in order to be thought partners with the communities with which our universities are situated in, and to which we are obligated to construct, co-construct an affirmative vision for the future. And I know that it probably seems counterintuitive to say this at this moment when there's just such rapid pace of violence and destruction and erasure, but that this is actually precisely the time when we should be heeding the call of James and Grace Lee Boggs, who told us to reimagine everything. Perhaps most crucially, though, Grace told us to recognize when reality is changing and that our ideas, too, must change accordingly. So I would say, to put it another way, we can't afford our work at present to be shaped by old ideas or be constrained by old imaginations. Grace also said late in her life that she was uncertain about what the next American Revolution would look like, but that we might be able to imagine it if our imaginations were rich enough. So I would say that it follows that during an unprecedented time of uncertainty and destruction and violence, that's precisely the time when we must grow and enrich our imaginations if we are indeed to bring about the next revolution that Grace was talking about. And lastly, Grace also talked about seeing the possibility of revolution in like a vacant lot, right? That was the result of strategic economic divestment and political disenfranchisement. So as we see things being smashed and destroyed around us, we must too also be able to expand our imaginations to see the possibility for revolution in that destruction. Finally, tonight, right, the focus is on ideas and imagination and their role in the political, cultural, and economic project of building the world anew. Before I bring up Dr. Spence, I just want to leave us with one indispensable insight about the nature of ideas. The architects and supporters of Project 2025 have grown their imaginations, and they have constructed a radical and affirmative vision for the future that isn't bound by precedent or the restraints of the status quo, or the law for that matter. They do believe that another world is possible, and so should we. However, ideas have power only if they are attached to institutions, social forces, working class and neighborhood orgs, and political parties who have real power. So free-floating ideas, right? They only have power when people who have an interest in seeing those ideas fulfilled have the power to effectuate them and take them on. We don't live in a political reality where the best ideas win out on merit. To win, we have to house our ideas in social actors, organizations, and institutions that have real power. So with that being said, I am very pleased to introduce a dear, dear friend, brilliant scholar, and the loudest talking person I have ever met, Dr. Lester Spence.
I hate you. What up, though? So, let me actually hold on. So let me turn this on. It's an honor to be here. Bam. There we go. There are people in this room who've known me since I was born, hey, Mom, make sure you keep your cell phone off this time. There are people in this room who've known me since first grade. There are people in this room who've introduced me. I don't know Wayne State as Wayne State. I actually know Wayne State as Nu Sigma because that's the chapter that my fraternity calls this. This is Nu Sigma. This is Nu Sigma to me. This will always be Nu Sigma to me. Then in addition, there are people who I've struggled with from the University of Michigan. There are people who I've looked up to as far as models to organize. And then as far as this past post-COVID period, it's like I kind of can define this post-COVID period as like before I met Dr. Angel McKissick and after I met Dr. Angel McKissick. I still don't like you. So I just want to kind of lay the land out. I take this really, really seriously. And for all you folk who know me, whether you know me as Lester, whether you know me as Kenyatta, whether you know me as Slinky, y'all can claim all the dope stuff and then be like, yeah, all the mistakes are his. So this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna start, I've been coming back and forth. It's weird because I've been gone from Detroit, the Detroit area. I was born in Detroit, grew up in Inkster, moved to Redford, and then I went to University of Michigan. Then I went to St. Louis in like 2000, and then I went to Baltimore in 2004. In all those spaces, in fact, I thought about the Detroit and the Detroit area as home, no matter where I was. That actually changed a little bit. I remember my brother gave there was a work picnic at Belle Isle, and I was talking to him in a work picnic at Belle Isle, and I just casually talked to somebody about going back home. Like, and I caught myself. I was like, oh my God, did I really say that out loud? That was the first time I'd ever thought of a place outside of Detroit as my home. I never thought about that. It was always here and then spreading out from here. This is the place that structured my own political imagination, my own idea of what's possible. It structured what I think the responsibility is of Black folk to Black folk, and then from Black folk to other folk to extend democracy. I learned all that stuff here. I learned that from my mom and dad. I learned it from the people I played basketball with. I learned it from the people who made me. So it's in that spirit, that I speak to you today. As an aside, for folks who see the stream from Baltimore and beyond, what up though? Oh, I'm sorry, that means hey. So one of the functions of me consistently coming back to the city is that I've been able to experience some of the changes, both as somebody who's from here and as somebody who's visited. It's a weird. So I'm just going to go through some of the things that I've seen happen. Detroit population increases for the first time in my life, not in my adult life, in my life. Detroit downtown development explosion. I remember when the Renaissance Center was the central image. Like anytime you saw a basketball game, they'd show it. I remember going there as a kid and getting lost. I'm going to talk about science fiction a bit, I think. I remember seeing, what was it? H.G. Wells. Damn it. What's his movie about time travel? The Time Machine. H.G. Wells, The Time Machine. H.G. Wells, The Time Machine was about a guy who would devise a time machine, and he goes to the future, he uses it, and he goes so far in the future, he sees a moment where humanity is divided into two populations. There's people who are elite and live above ground, and then there are people who live like below ground. I think they were like Morlocks. I think that's the name, right? And I remember going to the Renaissance Center. And this is me as like a 7, 8-year-old kid and seeing that moat in the front of the old Renaissance Center and being like, yo, that looks like the type of place the Morlocks would live, right? Now this is now on one hand, it's funny, but the other hand, that's basically me understanding as a 7, 8-year-old that the Renaissance Center was built in such a way as to make a stark distinction between the Renaissance Center and the Black city that it was situated in. Gloria House writes a wonderful dissertation on that, right? So there are all these different things, like that Hudson development, speaking of, I think my grandmother, mom, correct me if I'm wrong, I think my grandmother was one of the first Black women hired. Wasn't she one of the first Black women to be hired? She was one of the first Black women to be hired as the elevator operator. So for those of you for the young people in the room, including Dr. McKissick, so the old Hudson building used to have an elevator that had to be manually operated. So I am old enough to remember when it was manually operated. I'm old enough to remember I was telling somebody, I bought my mom like some cheap perfume in the Christmas room. They had the little Christmas site. I think I bought Dad something. I don't remember what I bought Dad, but I remember like it was some perfume with like a little bell on it. Like I remember that stuff. So to see that new Hudson building, I remember when it crashed. I remember when, oh my God, I remember when when the train center was actually a train center. Right? And then I remember all that time when it wasn't a train center. I think I took a picture in front of it in 2009, way before we could even imagine it being changed. Right? I remember one time I was in St. Louis and I couldn't quit the Detroit Lions for nothing. I was trying to quit them. I was straight trying to quit them. We moved to St. Louis and I couldn't find anywhere to watch the Lions game. And this is when St. Louis was dope. I mean, St. Louis was like killing people. And I remember driving, I must have driven like an hour, like the game started. And by the time I found a place to watch the Lions, it was 2 minutes left. They were against the Minnesota Vikings. They end up losing in the last second. That was the Lions, right? Like, I couldn't imagine, like, what the Lions are doing now. I'm like, this is, like, folks, I couldn't, and the Lions, the Tigers, the Red Wings, and the Pistons are all dope at the same time. I mean, like, that is crazy. I'm like, wow. I mean, it's just, for the older people in the room, even the ones who don't like sports, I know y'all get this. Mary Sheffield was elected as the first Black woman mayor of Detroit, right? That is something folks could have imagined. I remember when Sharon McPhail was running against Dennis Archer Sr., and that was very possible. I would suggest that if Duggan wasn't the mayor, that it wouldn't have been Mary necessarily, but a woman probably would have been that mayor, and we could talk about that. But that's kind of, if you think about, about the role of imagination and all that stuff, right? There are things that we can imagine, but there are things that we can't quite. Now, I mentioned all this stuff. All this stuff carries deep complications, right? So Detroit's population has increased, but the Black population has decreased 20%, like 5 percentage points, but that translates to like 20%. The city is becoming unaffordable for the first time, right? So it used to be, I didn't want this to be it's hard to give a talk like this at home without making it biographical. I don't want to be too biographical, but I'm hoping the stories I'm telling are illustrative. But so I remember when I was I was going up for tenure in Baltimore, and Bank of America was coming from our house at the same time. Like I had stopped paying because I was like, why would I pay? Why would I pay if I'm not going to get tenure? And one of the saving graces of that moment, which was really stressful, is I knew I could come back here and get a house inexpensively. Right? That's still kind of true in comparison, but absolutely it's not really true anymore. Like I've seen the prices for some of these condos downtown. I'm like, what? I mean, like there's an Apple here. I'm like, on Woodward. Right? I mean, there are all these elements, right? But it's so complicated. Development along those lines, development is really, really concentrated in downtown and then in neighborhoods that funders have some affinity with, largely because the populations that live there are seen to be desirable populations, right? Relatedly, the Black population is decreasing, but along with Black population decrease, you actually have histories being erased. Like what the hell is Midtown? Right? And there's this long history of neighborhood name shifts in order to make them, the new old neighborhoods good for capital, right? So we're seeing all that stuff. And that's just the local stuff. Nationally, so there's a phenomenon that I've begun to study and talk about called democratic backsliding. So to make a long story short, democratic backsliding, the term was developed in order to understand de-democratization. So again, thinking about, there are those of you who are old enough. So I graduated from Bishop Borges in 1987. Borges used to be on Plymouth and Telegraph. Plymouth and Telegraph has a plant right across the street from the high school. I forgot the name of the plant, but there's a plant. When I learned about the Cold War, I remember being told by Ms. Schubacher, our global studies teacher, that one of the nuclear sites that the Soviet Union would hit if we were to go into war was that plant right across the street from the school. So we never really had nuclear. They used to do they used to do nuclear bomb drills. Like we didn't need one. Because if we got hit, we were gonna get it was gonna be kind of immediate. So the Soviet Union, I was also around to see the Soviet Union go down. When the Soviet Union goes down, the argument is that the resulting states are gonna become democracies like the United States is a democracy. And then the whole world is gonna inexorably move towards that state. Right. In fact, Francis Fukuyama wrote a book called The End of History, making the argument that now that the big conflict between the Soviet Union and the United States and its allies was over, we're all going towards democracy, just the way we practice it. And you actually see that for a bit, but then all of a sudden, all these former democracies go backwards and they become autocracies. And they don't do it through military coups. They increasingly do it through electing somebody to office who then gradually peels back power from all these independent institutions and all these other political institutions, right? So democratic backsliding was a phenomenon that comparativists would use to study all other places. Now, the thing is those of us who study racial politics or just live in Detroit know that democracy really is kind of a special word when it comes to us. So it wasn't like we were all that democratic to begin with. My comparative brothers and sisters, they finally realized that around 2016. So they take this democratic backsliding concept and begin to apply it to the United States, right? And they can see, like they're saying, okay, all the rhetoric, it suggests that if this tendency, if this political party isn't backsliding, they're desirous of it. If this president isn't a backslider, he wants to be. So they start to study it vigorously. And then 2024, what do we see when he gets elected again? We see the rhetoric become action quicker than any political science, well, almost any political scientist thought was possible. So we can layer on to the city dynamic a series of national dynamics that have specific effects in Detroit and cities like it. So this includes the Doge cuts. I mean, we just now kind of sort of take for granted, massive cuts to USAID doesn't really exist anymore. You've got massive cuts to the Department of Education. You've got massive cuts to other bureaucracies. You've got significant media and university capture. Dr. McKissick talked about this. Universities are under. So in 2016, when he was elected the first time, I and another faculty member, a few other faculty members, we started to organize faculty immediately. But when we were organizing faculty, what we were organizing for were the students. The students who weren't from here, the students who definitely were articulated as a certain type of enemy. We were worried about the students. And that's what we organized for, right? We had, when it happened this time, we had to fight for our own lives. My university, Johns Hopkins University, gets more money from federal grants than any other university in the country. Significant cuts. University of Michigan, my alma mater, significant cuts. In fact, with the University of Michigan, we see the second worst example of a president basically bowing down to the president. Santa Ono, the only president who was worse was the Columbia president. Media, we see significant media capture. So all this stuff places us in a point where I think analytically we're looked at more as an illiberal democracy and no longer looked at as a liberal democracy. So we've gone back, absolutely, and then we've gone back alongside other countries to the point now where most of the world's population lives in autocracies rather than democracy. So we've got that local level stuff, and then we've got this national and international level stuff. What I suggest is that we can kind of see a few imaginaries that overlap to kind of shape what people think of as politically possible, to shape what people think is politically desirable, and to shape, to the extent that people want to solve the problem we're in, to shape that problem set, how they're going to solve it. So one imaginary is what I'll call the Bezos imaginary, named after Jeff Bezos. But actually, it could be also thought of as kind of like the Dan Gilbert imaginary, thinking about it locally. And the components of the imaginary: capital should overdetermine local, state, national, and international life. Labor should have little say over the conditions of their labor or their life. And then if you think about like kind of capital power and power represented as democracy, like they're going to choose capital power every time over democratic power. At best, what they'll do is create space for nonprofit entities. But what really drives this imaginary is a strong preference for capital over democracy. So that's one imaginary. Just want y'all to keep that in mind. The second imaginary, and they're overlapping, is what I'll call the Elon Musk imaginary. Now, on one hand, you'd say, like, I think Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk is #1 as far as wealthiest person in the world. Maybe Jeff Bezos, I think Jeff Bezos is like top 5. I don't know where he is, but he's probably top 5. As an aside, I think I did the calculation once. This is how much money I think they're worth. I calculate, like, you take the day that Christopher Columbus was supposed to have been born, and you just multiply, you just calculate how many seconds there have been between his birth and now. They're making, I mean, they're worth like massive money per second. It's not like $1 per second since Christopher Columbus has been born. I'm talking about like, and I used to have it written down, I should have. It's like massive loot. If one of y'all calculated, like just tell me. But the thing is that there's a problem in saying that Bezos and Musk are the same, because it's not just because they're two different individuals, but there are different types of capital, right? And even if you have capital in the same in the same general sector, you can have segments of that capital who are desirous of a different type of political project. So this is the Musk imaginary. In addition to the dynamics I mentioned above, most important one is certain types of non-white life and queer life should be expunged. Now, that's not necessarily the Gilbert imaginary, that's not necessarily the Bezos imaginary, but a central part of the Musk imaginary, largely probably due to his South African heritage that people don't really talk about, is he believes that non-white life, particularly non-white life that isn't able to create and help develop capital around capital around AI, they should be expunged. Their knowledges should be erased and replaced. He actually has like a racist AI. I didn't even know something like that was possible. Like he's creating like a racist AI that gives like racist answers to like normal questions. Now again, we can say that both that Bezos/Gilbert imaginary is problematic and that Musk imaginary is problematic, but there's a vicious, explicit racial dynamic in the Musk project. And then there's the Project 2025 MAGA imaginary, which has elements of both those two, only it's a lot more non-white. Like it's a lot more non-white and it's a lot more heteronormative. Like what they want to do. So going back to democratic backsliding, one of the things that became interesting to me was that if you look at nations that are backsliding, you know, that one of the things, like there's this moment where they actually start to shift, right? And go backwards. Demographic change is a really important component. Like if you all of a sudden you got their ethnic or racial majority, that moment it sees itself as becoming a minority, like that's the moment where they're far more likely to support anti-democratic measures. I mean, like far more likely. one way to think about Project 2025 and MAGA is being driven by that. Their policies on reproductive health, their policies on quote unquote DEI, their policies about their feelings about universities like Wayne State, universities that have increasingly robust African-American studies programs, universities that have large and dynamic Black populations. So those are a few imaginaries, but this is Detroit, the Blackest city in North America. So in addition to those imaginaries, we've got Black imaginaries. Now these are overlapping. So one imaginary is kind of like, it's that Coleman Young imaginary that sees Black political representation as not as essential to the governing of a city like Detroit. I think we can draw a straight line and skip over Kwame from that Coleman Young imaginary. I just had to get that in. We can draw a straight line from Coleman Young to Mary Sheffield in a certain way, right? That's complications, though. There's a Black excellence imaginary. So one of the things that used to be unique about Detroit, it's not quite unique anymore, but Detroit used to have more Black homeowners than any other spot, right? And Detroit had enough Black people with wealth that you actually had a stratified dynamic within the city. You had Black people with little to no loot. You had Black people with loot. You had Black people with high levels of loot. You had Black people with high levels of education. You had my great-grand uncle was Howard's first Black medical school dean. There are all types of Black folk with stories like that in Detroit. And it's always been that way, right? But there's an imaginary attached to that, which suggests that that's the thing. That is to the degree we create conditions where Black high income earners or Black folk with high education, like the one way to triflingly think about it is like those Cass kids, those Renaissance kids, those King kids, right? I mean, my sister went to Cass. I'm not tripping. I'm not tripping at all. But like, if we create conditions where they can thrive, then they'll bring everybody else up under them, right? And then there's kind of what I'll call like an Afro-pessimist imaginary. That imaginary suggests that the modern world is essentially anti-Black. It would see the dominance of MAGA, both United States and then increasingly worldwide, as a function of the world's anti-Blackness, and that the most important political thing that we could do would be basically to burn it all down. And then once you, in as much as anti-Blackness is essential to modernity, once you end up kind of replacing modernity, we'll have this other thing. Now, there's one imaginary I haven't talked about, and that's the Black radical imaginary. That Black radical imaginary has a few different components. One component is it believes it kind of locates Black life in working class life. So instead of thinking, and again, I went to Michigan, most of my friends went to Cass Renaissance. Instead of thinking that the Cass Renaissance sect should be that the population we build on, it would be the Cody folk. It would be the Henry Ford folk. It would be the Cooley folk, right? What do you know about that? You're too young to even know about this. I hear somebody doing the Earl Flynn in the back. Are you even old enough to wow. I wish y'all could see. That's crazy. That you just made my day. So that's the first thing. It locates it in that population. It locates it in that population. The other element of it, it believes in a robust defense of the public good. Universities like Wayne State should be as close as possible to free. It shouldn't be a dynamic where you have to go to a school like Cass or Renaissance to get a quality education. That should be broad. Housing in Detroit shouldn't be something that you have to have loot to purchase. Right? So that's the second component. And then the third component, and there's more, but the third component is that cities like Detroit should be run by the population that lives in it. It shouldn't be run by capital. It shouldn't be run by the nonprofit sector. It shouldn't be run by the creative class. It should be run by the people who live in it. And it should be run as democratically as possible with a broad, capacious understanding of democracy. Now, what I'd suggest is that imaginary used to be far bigger and far more important than it is now. And that imaginary has shrunken in large part because of politics. Now, in addition to Mary Sheffield being elected, there are actually two other elections in this cycle that are really important to think about. One is Mom Donnie's election in New York City. Yeah, it's a dope thing, isn't it? But the other, and this is, I didn't even know about this until I just read about this today. Katie Wilson in Seattle. How many people are familiar with Katie? Oh, Katie Wilson, she's a bad girl. She's got no record of really holding office, and now she's the mayor of Seattle. And then extending back to previous election cycles, we can add to that Brandon Johnson in Chicago. I don't like the Bulls, I don't like the Bears, but Brandon Johnson's a bad boy. We could point to a certain extent to our own Brandon Scott in Baltimore. And then we can point to someone who's kind of Detroit by relation, Antar Lumumba. Chokwe Lumumba, for those of you who don't know, Chokwe Lumumba was a black radical activist here in Detroit, moved down to Jackson, used an independent political black radical organization to become mayor of Jackson, passes away, unfortunately. His son ended up taking over. So there are all these kind of examples of folk doing dope work. So Mom Donnie runs on an explicit left campaign. Katie Wilson runs explicitly on a tax the wealthy campaign. Brandon Johnson ran, and every time you pull up an Instagram clip of him, he is talking about the need to create public resources for the least of these. And now, I don't believe elections are all that. So I had to say this out loud because some folk, I am not suggesting that elections are the be all and end all of politics. But what I am suggesting is that they represent powerful electoral examples of what can happen if we extend and cultivate our imagination of what's possible, right? So I'm gonna take Mamdani, and then I'm gonna use Mamdani to fold back on Detroit. So in 1972, 9/11, Chile is overthrown. The president of Chile is overthrown. The United States actually helped that process. When they overthrow the Chilean president and replace him, the first thing the president does is he privatizes all state resources. He privatizes what we think of as a welfare state, and then he basically gives the state over to capital. It's the first example of what we will go on to become, what we will go on to call the neoliberal turn. The neoliberal turn represents a shift in common sense to a dynamic where people believe, like the common sense idea is that private businesses always do stuff better than governments do. And even if we want government, the best way to get government to function correctly is to make it run like a business. With the neoliberal term, we see a significant reduction of labor's rights to organize. We see a significant reduction of the welfare state. And it's not just a reduction of the welfare state, we actually shifted, right? So welfare used to be about giving single mothers the capacity to do the most important job society would have them do. And what is that? Be moms. That's what it used to do. It's like if the market comes in on you, if the market is telling you you need to work, you need to work, you need to work, and you got a kid, what the welfare state would do is say, no, we got you. You do that. Don't worry about the market. With the neoliberal turn, what happens? It becomes about forcing single mothers into the market. Why do you force them into the market? Because the reason they need welfare in the first place is because they're not entrepreneurial enough. I apologize for some of y'all who, like, this is the part of the speech that kind of focuses on my work. So if you see me talk, you see me do this part before. Don't skip it, but, you know, just maybe pause for a minute. Turn the volume down or something. With Chile, Chile is the first nation we really see that happening. What's the first local incident? The first local incident is in New York City. Now, New York City was so liberal in like the late 60s and early 70s that you could go to the City University of New York for free. And you didn't even need to really apply. Like it didn't have no SAT requirement, no ACT requirement. You could just actually just like go, right? And I'm just gonna use that as an illustration of how liberal how liberal New York City was, how dedicated they were to spending resources to make it affordable for people to live, and then give people the capacity to actually have their kids grow and develop, right? Like maybe you weren't able to go to college, but you live in New York City, you live maybe in the Bronx in like a rent-controlled apartment, you got 2 kids, you could send your kids there. And then they can grow and go on to be dope in their own ways. Between 1970 and I'm going to fudge the dates a little bit, until 1975, New York City political officials were in a running war with finance capital on one hand and development capital on the other, because all these their municipal budget actually required taxes, but it consistently required like loans. So there's a moment in time where the bankers were like, you know what? You're becoming too liberal for our taste. the more money or more resources you give to labor, the more power labor has. The more power labor has, the less power we have. So we're going to stop giving you money. New York City was like, whatever, we'll go to the federal government instead. 50 years ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, New York Post headline, Ford to city, drop dead. It's arguably the most important domestic headline of the 70s, one of the most important domestic headlines of the last 50 years. When the federal government says that New York City can't meet its obligations, what ends up happening? New York State ends up passing laws, and this stuff for Detroit is to sound really familiar. They start passing laws to do what? To constrain the ability of the city to use municipal funding for the public good. They created 2 agencies that basically New York City was legally bound to pass their budget through, but in order to get it passed. What type of things do you think they cut? They end up cutting public hospitals. They end up significantly slashing hospital beds. They end up cutting fire department service. They end up cutting police. I'm sorry, Angel did say I was loud. I'm like feeling it, because I get pissed about this stuff. So they cut all the dynamics. If I'm too loud, can somebody be like, damn it, now? Because I try, I can. All right, thank you. Yeah, thank you. That does work. That does work on that. So what they end up doing is significantly hamstringing the ability of New York City to spend their goods on working class people. Now, one path they could have taken would have been to elect people to consistently and persistently fight that. They took a different path. The most important mayor of New York City was Ed Koch. When Ed Koch gets elected, he internalizes the austerity discipline. So you don't have to tell him to cut the budget. You don't have to tell him to prepare New York City for capital. He just does it. And one central element that's really important about the neoliberal turn exists in the United States. The neoliberal turn doesn't happen without race. So you aren't able to cut welfare without labeling welfare as a Black woman's thing. One thing I didn't talk about the neoliberal turn, you see a significant rise in the carceral state, significant spending on police, and then extending police power. You're not able to do that without the Black male criminal. And then you're not able to, the whole idea of reducing municipal budgets and reducing spending on, the public good. You're not able to do that without kind of castigating the public, tarring the public as being Black. You aren't, or being non-white, and you're not able to do, and it's a lot easier to do it if you've got Black electoral leadership. It's not a coincidence that the neoliberal turn happens at the same time you see the Voting Rights Act being applied to elect Black representative after Black representative after Black representative, including, although it wasn't necessarily needed, including Coleman Young. So Koch gets elected. And then after Koch, even David Dinkins, they're all disciplined. And this common sense ends up changing about New York. So here's one way to think about it, talking about the popular imagination. 2 of the most popular TV shows I grew up watching when I was a kid were Welcome Back, Kotter and Barney Miller. Both set in New York City, both set in working class workplaces, both featuring racially heterogeneous populations, right? You fast forward to the 90s, Friends, Seinfeld, Sex and the City, all of a sudden, that dynamic shifts where you see TV show after TV show, and there are exceptions, but TV show after TV show where it's kind of not in the workplace, the populations are homogenous. Like, I liked Seinfeld. Seinfeld, maybe had one Black person in it. I actually didn't like Friends, but because I liked Living Single. But Friends had a few Black people in it. I think maybe Sex and the City. There was maybe the first iteration, there was maybe a Black guy, maybe one. This as the population of New York is becoming more and more diverse, right? So even the popular imagination of what New York is articulated as shifts. Times Square. Times Square used to be the location for like heterogeneity with a capital H. Like working class, if you were queer and trying to figure your stuff out, you could do it there all these different ways. You go to Times Square post like 1995, and what is it? Right? It's like Disney on steroids. I remember the newspaper article, and I wasn't going to New York at that time, because I live in Detroit. I remember the newspaper article depicting what the new New York City would look like. I'm like, what the hell is that? Right? But to go down there and see it, it's crazy. It's like the probably most photographed space in the world, and there is nothing there that says working class. Nothing. And then even kind of the imaginary of what's possible, right? So I'm talking to my son. My oldest son lives there, Kamari. And this is after the election. He was like, well, I think this dope, but is he really going to be able to tax the rich? I mean, I thought if you tax the wealthy, they just pass the cost on to the consumer. You see that logic? Right? You see that logic? If taxing the wealthy means you pass it on to the consumer all the time, then what's a policy you never want to do? Or in fact, they either pass the cost on to you, or you end up, or they end up leaving. So the wealthy will either leave or they'll make you pay. Why would that be an option? Right? That's an example of like your imagination being narrow, right? Now, but you fast forward from say like 1990, 1994 to 2010, 2011. What happens in fast forward to 2008. What happens in 2008? You get that financial crisis. Like that's the moment actually where my house ended up getting in foreclosure, right? We all get jammed. What happens 2-3 years later? What happens 2-3 years later? Occupy Wall Street. People forget about Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street, which it's important because I'm going to talk about the international aspects probably in Q&A. It's important to note Occupy Wall Street doesn't happen without Arab Spring. Arab Spring creates the ideational condition for some people to suggest in a magazine called Adbusters that people occupy Wall Street. And then next thing you know, it happened. I mean, I don't even think the people who created the ad in the magazine, they had no idea what they were calling into being, right? So they call it into being. All of a sudden, you've got occupies everywhere. And for the first time, people are now bringing capitalism into question explicitly. And they're thinking about the increasing degree that the wealthy are starting to dominate politics, and they're saying no. I remember all the stuff you remember. So Mildred Gaddis, I love Mildred Gaddis. Mildred Gaddis is dope. I was on a radio show with her when I started to do this stuff, like in the early 2000s. And I forgot what the subject was, but I just talked to her. I was like, yeah, we should make college education free. She was like, make college education free? Why would we do that? People need to be responsible for their tuition. Neoliberal turn. Neoliberal turn. What's the best way to make sure that somebody takes the education they're given and makes proper use of it? What's the best way? You make them pay for it. You make them pay, they're going to be really, really, really sensitive about where they choose to go. You make them pay, they're going to choose a major that's going to actually help them pay off their bills. You make them pay, won't be no student takeovers. That's the political imposition. All of a sudden, that's the common sense. That's the common sense to the point that Mildred Gaddis, who loves Black people, she's a great race woman, is like, I don't know if I agree with all that. You can find, I bet you, if the tape exists and is online, you can find it. And because it's Mildred Gaddis, I can only go in, I can only disagree. I disagree, but it's Mildred Gaddis. I can't, that's like going against my mom. I can't even do that. But that's kind of how that common sense works. What Occupy Wall Street does is create the conditions to change that. Now, one of the things that people asked of Occupy Wall Street that Occupy Wall Street never gave them was a series of concrete asks. And if you look at Occupy Wall Street, particularly after the occupations were all dissolved through political action, you'll see a lot of articles that say some combination of they failed or they will most likely fail because they didn't have enough asks. Right? They didn't have enough asks. Hold that. Occupy Wall Street happens. An important component of the neoliberal turn, as I've noted, is increased use of state violence, of police violence. The absolute number of police increase, the money we spend on police increase. When I give this talk and talk about Baltimore, police spending, in 1980, police spending was like $145 million. By like 2015 or whatever, it was over 500. I think it was close to 500 million. It's over 500 million now. By way of comparison, spending on parks and recreation was 35 million in 1980. Is 35 million now. Right? And then what they're tasked to do, it increases, and again, it becomes more vicious. So Black Lives Matter, if Occupy Wall Street fights against the wealth extraction dynamic, Black Lives Matter fights against the state violence. And for the first time since the 90s, we see people organizing, not just against state violence. They're not using Rosa Parks-like figures to organize. And to be clear, it's not that I'm not, like Rosa Parks, you should read her biography if you haven't done so already. The biography of Rosa Parks, I already knew she was dope, but she's even, doper isn't a word, but I'll make it one. That's one of the things about being a professor, you can just make up words. She's doper than I thought she was. But you had people in Black Lives Matter organizing against all these folk who had records, all these folk who weren't respectable in any way we define. They're organizing for them and winning. Now, I talked about Mamdani, and I talked about Brandon Johnson. Mamdani represents the first salvo in a 50-year struggle against capital. The first mayoral salvo. 1975, Ford to City, dropped dead. 2011, Occupy Wall Street. 2025, Zohran Mamdani. One of the things that ends up increasing in New York between Occupy Wall Street and Zohran Mamdani's election is the growth of Democratic Socialists of America. Democratic Socialists of America used to be like, even in New York, like their meeting would be like this room. It'd be the Munchkins in the back, including the one who knows the Errol Flynn. And then a couple of old folk, to give them wisdom, but it'd be nobody else. Now it's like, I think it's at least 11,000 people. They create the condition to elect AOC to Congress. They create the conditions to elect Mamdani. Again, when I get the question and answers, elections aren't the only thing. But for me, this represents an example of a counter-reaction in 1975, a political movement response in 2010, 2011, that then generates an organizational response that then extends the imagination to the point where somebody can not just run on increasing the public good, increasing our ability to tax the wealth, increasing democracy, they can win demonstrably. He increased voting. They haven't had this much voter turnout in New York City in an off-year election, mind you, since 1969. Brandon Johnson in Chicago, and then I'll talk about Detroit, and then I'll wrap it up. Thank y'all for bearing with me. So Brandon Johnson is a member of the Chicago Teachers Union. Now, I talked about the neoliberal turn, reducing the ability of labor to organize. Like, one of the ways you see this in cities like Chicago is they create laws to politically hamstring the labor union. So the state of Illinois, they passed this law, and it's devious. What they did was they calculated, like, what's the highest percentage of a vote that we can make an organization required and be legal. So they made it where the Chicago Teachers Union couldn't strike without, like, I think a 75% vote of all of its members. Not a 75% vote at a quorum. You know what I mean? Not like we represent 10,000 people. So we can strike if, say, 75% of us say yes. Like, no, it's 75% of everybody who pays dues. Y'all know how hard a vote that is to get? Like, if me and the bros are hanging out, if it's just 5 of us, we can't figure out where to drink. Am I lying? So they just knew a 75% vote. No way in hell are they going to get that. As a partial byproduct of Black Lives Matter organizing, which happens at the same time that the mayor is trying to privatize the school system, you create the political capacity to actually end up running and winning for office. And in fact, it's deep because Brandon Johnson wouldn't have been the first Chicago Teachers Union mayor what ended up happening was the sister who was at the forefront of a lot of organizing, she ended up passing away. If she doesn't pass away, they never get Lori Lightfoot. Lori Lightfoot was the first queer mayor of a major city, but she was really centrist, really centrist. If this sister doesn't pass, Lori Lightfoot isn't the mayor. But Lori Lightfoot is supplanted or replaced by Brandon Johnson. And Brandon Johnson, I've never seen somebody so, it reminds me of how Coleman Young used to be. Right, what he's willing to say, you know, how he's willing to stand up for Black life and for working class life, how he's willing to say, like, listen, if Chicago's, his line is Chicago's the best freaking city in the world. And it's like, you know, Black people don't really say freaking, you know, they really say something else, but that's him, you know, he can't really, he can't be like Coleman Young that way, right? Because you know what Coleman Young would have, you know, what it said. I mean, even a kid, how do you know what Coleman Young would have said? I mean, you nodding like, yeah, you know what Coleman Young would just, why do you know? Goodness gracious. Like, whenever you give a talk like this, there's going to be somebody that's with you all the way. You know, like, I'm expecting my mom, I'm expecting my friends from grade school, you know, I'm expecting, I'm not expecting a kid in the back to, like, no, that's like crazy. Anyway, what he's doing is extending the possibilities, right? Now, I want to bring this back to Detroit. If Mamdani had to fight implicitly against that 1975 New York Ford to New York City Ford to City drop dead, and the imaginary produced by that, if Brandon Johnson had to fight the imaginary produced way before that law was passed in the unions, but the dynamic contained in that, what Detroit folk have to fight is the imaginary legacy of the bankruptcy. Because that imaginary legacy has had 3 consequences, more than 3, but 3. And then I'm going to talk about what we're going to do, and then we can get the question and answer. Again, I thank y'all because this is like late on a Thursday. So the first thing it does is it reduces symbolic belief in the ability that Black people have the right and the capacity to govern. Every city, every municipality, every school unit with a majority Black population in the state of Michigan was placed under emergency financial management. Every single one. Detroit's the largest. So the first thing it does, it reduces symbolic belief in the ability Black people have the right and capacity to govern. Right? It's not a coincidence that Duggan ends up becoming the mayor, right? That's the first thing. The second thing it does is it significantly hamstrings, by definition, the ability of the city to provide public goods. Remember what happened in New York City? How the state laws end up getting passed to discipline New York's ability or control over the budget? What we see with emergency financial management is the same thing, only it's statewide and worse. So the city of Detroit was, I think the debt load was like $8 billion. I think $7 billion of that debt was written off. And in the course of the write-off, it ends up, killing pensions. And it just ends up disciplining the city to to the point where it just can't, to the extent it can provide a public good, or it does provide public goods, those public goods are provided by philanthropic organizations. So I forget what the split was, but Kresge got responsibility for a segment of the city's comeback. Skillman, because my girl used to run Skillman, I know Skillman had control over education. And then there was a third nonprofit that had control over other aspects, right? And then actually, as I'm talking about it out loud, it ended up creating the conditions where a figure like Dan Gilbert could step in the gap, buy real estate on the cheap, right? So that's the second thing. Folding into that third thing, the development. Got the numbers. Comerica Park, I talked about the Lions, the Tigers, and Lions, the Tigers, and the Pistons, and the Red Wings. And again, it's dope. I even got Lions paraphernalia for the first time. I like wear a sweatshirt and everything. My girlfriend got it for me. I'd be like straight rocking it. Like I never thought I'd be that dude. Comerica Park cost $300 million. 38% of that is publicly funded. Ford Field, $430 million, 36% of that was publicly funded. District Detroit, they're voting on District Detroit at the same time that Detroit is under bankruptcy. $2.8 billion, $1.8 billion from public funds. So the imaginary is like you can't spend money on working class life, but you can spend money on capital, even if capital doesn't need it. So the third thing is you can go up the street, you can go up the block and see how crazily beautiful Detroit is, downtown anyway, and connect that to the bankruptcy. Right? In fact, there's a really good academic article, if y'all want it, holler at me, that actually studied how is it that people remember the bankruptcy, but increasingly the common sense is that it had to happen. That everything we're getting now is a function of that bankruptcy. Cultivating radical imagination. I talked about two political movements, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter. There's actually a third movement. That third movement is the Tea Party movement. The Republican Party in the modern era has always been racist. But as of 2010, the Republican Party basically became, it was basically taken over by a radical counter-reactionary white supremacist sect. As Dr. McKissick said, they actually understood themselves as attempting to extend the imaginary to be able to say the unsayable, to be able to think the unthinkable, to be able to do the undoable. To the point where it's common sense with at least a group of them that we don't need elections. Maybe this dictatorship can work for us. To the point where, Halloween has been a moment in the modern era. Halloween has been a space of whites using Halloween to express racism, usually that racism comes in the form of blackface. I saw a clip, somebody in a full Nazi uniform. Right, like that's a new thing. It's not the same thing to go in a full Nazi uniform and be like hanging out in the streets. Do the undoable, say the unsayable, think the unthinkable. So we've got three political movements that have extended the imaginary. In all those instances, that imagination has been cultivated by institutions, by individuals, by organizations, by the law, by policy. What we need to do in this moment is that here. Now, what are examples where we've already seen that? In 1967 or 1968, after the rebellion, Black radicals decided to hold a public tribunal after the police officers associated with some of the deaths that came during the rebellion. When they got off, Black radicals decided to have a public tribunal. I mentioned Rosa Parks earlier. Rosa Parks, I think, was one of the jurors. Kenny Cockrell, who would have been mayor after Coleman Young instead of Dennis Archer Sr. had he not passed away, he was one of the lawyers, and I forget who the other one was. Yes. Yep. Ravis. Now listen to that, right? That's Detroit. What that act did was create a public space to extend people's imagination to what government was supposed to do, how the law was supposed to function, what the public's role in it was supposed to be. They did that. I think there were like 2,000 to 3,000 people who attended. I was talking to Dr. McKissick about this on the side. In Baltimore, we had when everything happened, because we were organizing when the election happened, the second election happened, and he got inaugurated. We had like a rapid response meeting. We had a public space, and we were just like, yo, anybody who wants to like fight, just come. I think maybe we had 200 RSVPs. I mean, like 1,000 plus showed up. Every No Kings protest they have, thousands, right? The capacity is there. People are looking for something to do. They're looking for ways to be of service. What examples like that 1967, 1968 example show is that we are capable of doing that. Peter talked about, no, you talked about the law. One of y'all talked about the law and how important it was. No, it was you. You talked about the law. You talked about the law because Peter didn't come talk at all. And it's not possible to talk about the civil rights movement, to talk about the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. It's not possible to talk about the Legal Defense Fund without talking about Howard Law School folk. Howard Law School was a day law school, or let me say it was a night law school in the 20s and 30s. You went to Howard if you had another job and you wanted to get a law degree, and you would take classes at night. What happened was Charles Hamilton Houston saw the law as a fundamental site of struggle and changed the law school to make it a functioning law school that could teach a new theory of law that can then be used to create a new theory of democracy that could then be used to create one of the most important nonviolent revolutions on the face of the planet. So we think about that public tribunal, and the law was embedded in that because it was a tribunal. You had to have functioning people who actually knew the law. But we think about that public tribunal as one attempt to create a public. We could think about that Charles Hamilton Houston moment with Howard Law School as another attempt to create people who have a new theory of law and who explicitly put the service of Black people at the forefront of their attempt to follow the law. I talked for a long ass time. I apologize. I'm sorry for cussing. I've talked to her for a really long time. This is probably the hardest time to be an adult in our history. The only population, I think, that can have a claim to experiencing what we're experiencing now is the population that lived under the Jim Crow, lived in the Jim Crow South. But the difference is not that the difference is not just the region, it's the whole thing. And that's real. But what's also real is that it represents a profound opportunity for us to take spaces like this, schools like this, and change them irrevocably in the way that would make our kids, our grandkids, our great-grandkids, our great-great-grandkids proud of the work we accomplished. So on that note, I think I've spoken long enough. I can't say in the words, and y'all have heard me long enough to know I can speak. I can't say in words how much of an honor this is, and I look forward to the questions. Thank you. So y'all need y'all to do me a favor. So we're gonna take like 2-3 questions at a time. And I say 2-3 questions at a time to make sure I get everybody's questions. And also, y'all know in times like this, people be wanting to give lectures. Like, you know, they don't really have questions. They really want to give lectures. One of the blessings of me now being older, like me being like old, is like I can with love pretty much, you know, back in the day, I couldn't really do it because I was a kid, but I can with love be like, yo, you know, is there a question in there? So I ask that y'all like phrase your comments in the form of a question and be as brief as possible so we can get through all of them. Because the other thing is, y'all know I go long. I don't, you know, you just 3 questions at a time. I'm taking 2 hours to answer each of them. All right, let's do it. Malik's got a question.
Does this work? Yep, it does. We can make our way down.
You
Oh,
can
just-
do.
Calling him out.
I
Yeah.
saw his face. I looked at his face. He got
Thank you so much for all the insights that you shared. And, you know, I came here really wanting to be deeply inspired and with some concrete action, right, that I can put into practice from an imaginative standpoint of where we're at. So if you would be kind enough to speak to that, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Okay, it's still forming.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much, Professor Spence. My name is Sydney Calloway, and I'm the former co-chair of the Detroit Reparations Task Force. So all of the work that I've been doing has been very, very imaginatory. So my question to you is, how do we start to shift the mindsets around the possibilities of reparations, not only as a payment towards and for Black people,
Yeah.
but the way that it could shift the existence and trajectory of the city. Because I know that was one of the questions that was posed to me, and I feel like my answer wasn't sufficient enough. But
Oh,
just
thank
like,
you.
how do we shift the trajectory of the city?
Yeah, and as an aside, I don't think I mentioned, there was a reparations, something just happened yesterday, right? Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, there
the
was a
report
the
dropped.
report was the support
Yes.
report dropped.
Yes.
Yeah, yesterday. Yeah, yeah. Oh, wow, that's congratulations. That's dope.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep, it was just in the paper today.
Thank you. You know, before I ask a question, I have to say this. So there's a lot of Black scholars that I've heard speak, and I always ask myself, what really gives them credibility? And the thing that they don't have that you have is that they have not danced on stage with George Clinton and P. Funk. Now to my question. So you kind of alluded to the limitations of electoral politics. I wonder if you could speak a bit more about what you see as being the possibilities and the limitations of electoral politics in this time period.
Thank you. So Kevin, hold on. So I'll take those three. And thank you. One of the things, I'm usually really good on like the inspiration thing, but then when it comes to drilling down, it can be difficult to do, particularly in like a short lecture. What I'd say is, so what I've been doing, I gave a talk. Was it when I give that talk at the Redford Library? Was that? It was last month. I want to say it's September. It was September. So I gave a talk on democratic backsliding at the Redford Public Library, you know, because it's the library, you know, in my neighborhood. And what I've been doing is using that talk structure to both inform publics, but then also to produce publics, right? So one thing, if we thinking about cultivating a radical imagination, I think one thing that individuals can do is go to their library and either host programs yourself or work in collaboration with other organizations to have kind of conversation sessions. So if you think about movement work, one of the most fundamental components of movement work is political education. And I think we don't use that enough, right? So you take an issue and I will connect it to reparations. I see reparations as a really important, as a really innovative way to generate support for the idea that we should be using public resources to inform, you know, to serve the public good. In fact, I'll give a shout out to an organization in Baltimore, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. The Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, they were basically high school kids in the early 2000s, Baltimore high school kids. They became, they participated in something called urban policy debate. Urban policy debate is a form of debate where every year the entire nation debates a specific question. And somebody noted, and scholarships are on the line, so somebody noticed that there weren't really city kids involved. Long story short, they create a way for city kids to get involved. City kids in places like Baltimore take it and use it to radicalize themselves, to radicalize policy debate, and then to get policy victories in the world. So in Baltimore, what Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle is doing now is they're creating a conception of reparations where we know, like, we can calculate in neighborhoods, Detroit and throughout the state, what neighborhoods were hardest hit by the drug war. We can calculate lives lost. We can calculate in bodies going to the penitentiary. We can and then we can actually give a cost to that. So they just start legalizing weed in Baltimore, and you've got all these weed joints sprouting up. And these weed businesses, actually, you have to pay like a certain amount of money to get the license. So what they're doing is they're calling for, I might get the details wrong, they're calling for a tax. So all these entities are taxed, and then the neighborhoods that are hardest hit get to determine for themselves how the money is spent. What that does is it takes a theoretical issue, reparations, it gets it drilled down in ways that everybody can understand, and then uses that to generate a public and a call for public goods. So when we think about what you can do, it's like what you can do is create political education spaces where we're informing people about kind of broad theory, but we're also informing folk about other cases. Like what I'm doing with the Democratic backsliding thing, and as an aside, if any of y'all want to bring me up for this stuff, I don't need no check. I will, next time I come home, I will come and do it. What I'm doing with that is I'm speaking as a professor. I'm talking as a political scientist. I'm talking about the literature. But my goal with those conversations is to put people in dialogue with one another and to get them to understand how a concept like backsliding is applying to their life. Right? That's what we can do. Right? So and we have to start small, because to be fair, there was a moment when Detroit's radical imagination was broad and capacious and was probably one of the biggest in the country. But now, as a byproduct, not just of the emergency financial stuff, but like the slow death of the unions and other political dynamics, it's like we have to build that imagination all over again. So it's about starting small. So that's what I say. Elections. So I believe that there are a number of benefits to elections in general. And now I'm extending beyond, I'm extending beyond like holding political office for a municipality or whatever, right? So what elections do, at that level, but also like at a fraternity chapter or at a church or at a civic organization, what that does is it gives people the capacity to exert power over who exerts authority over them or with them. And it gives them ability to also serve as a check, right? So there are challenges with elections. There are challenges with who participates in elections. There are challenges with who runs for elections. Elections, even at the local level, require money that most of us don't have access to. The two-party system is a problem at every level, and I believe that's baked in. It's not impossible to dismantle, but it's really, really difficult. But with that said, elections represent a really important, although flawed, form of choosing leadership, of choosing representation, and of holding representatives accountable. And it has to be. It used to go without saying, but you have to say it now. It like prevents leadership change from occurring through violence. So here's something that I've talked about before. If you read, like, when we think about the end of Reconstruction, we think about the end of Reconstruction, which happens in like 1876 or 1877. We think about the right to vote being taken as soon as Reconstruction ends. Reconstruction ends, the vote ends. No. It was contested from 1877 to 1890. What happens in 1890? One of the things that happens in 1890 is you have white Democrats, and the Democrats are white supremacists in the South. They're like, listen, we're going to have to pass a law about this, because we just can't have people using violence to determine who can and can't vote. It has to be legal. If it's not legal, the next thing you know, because he knew right now you're not letting people vote, or you're wanting to kill people because they're black and they're trying to vote. If you got no law, next thing you know, it's gonna be, oh, it's because you just got here, or it's gonna be because you're voting for somebody I don't want. Right? They're like, we have to create a dynamic, a legal framework for people to choose their leadership without using other means. Like, I'm not really calling the bros out, but like sometimes we have chapter meetings where we've got, my fraternity is wonderful. I wouldn't be on stage with George Clinton if I was on stage. I was on stage setting out hops with George Clinton. Before George Clinton was a Q, I was on stage stepping with George Clinton. That's what I was doing. You can find it on YouTube. So we are wonderful, but we contain every part of Black manhood. And some parts of Black manhood are martial. Not M-A-R-S-H-A-L-L, M-A-R-T-I-A-L. There are votes that if we chose leadership and we didn't have votes, we'd be fighting. And then the first person who gets slammed on the ground, he'd be the one who lost. That's a serious, so it's illustrative, but that's actually serious. Like being able to choose who wins and loses, who chooses the course of an organization, and it's not violent. So that's another reason why elections are important. And we don't talk about that enough because we take it for granted. We don't talk about that enough in Black populations because when we think about democracy, we think about us being at the bottom of it and it being illegitimate as a result of that, as opposed to us, yes, being at the bottom of it, but us being the populations that's done more to articulate, expand, and sustain it. Not just for everybody, but within our own organizations. See, that's why it's 3 questions at a time. Next 3. See, that's, yeah.
Yeah, this is only the last 3 because we have.
I'm listening.
Okay, all right. There were hands. I'm sorry. 1, 2. There's someone. Oh, I didn't even see you. Okay.
Good evening. My name's James Harris, and I'm one of the fraternity members that Dr. Spence keeps talking about from Maker Sci-Fi. Brother Spence, can you, in light of the assault that's taken place on DEI and the education efforts, can you offer some suggestions for individuals to be able to, assist in either homeschooling or making sure that our next generations are getting well-rounded education, so that because if they're removing the history, we want to make sure there's still some ways for them to still get a full rounded education.
Thank you. That's a great question. Thanks, bro. And thank you for everything. Thank you for everything.
So you spoke a lot about Madani and the politics of that. I'm kind of curious, with using a radical imagination lens, what advice you would have for Mary Sheffield?
Oh. Yeah. Yep. It's a great question.
I guess I'm following up on the other question in some way, but well, actually, I don't really want to ask that question. I just wanted to say one thing about elections, and that is that the elections of what we've seen in the last 10 years, one thing we've seen is the legalization of socialist politics. And that's something I think is significant. And there's a whole lot of stuff that goes along with that, but I don't want to talk about that. The one question I did have, though, I am obsessed with the resurrection of Confederate politics in our society. Mm-hmm. With J.D. Vance as people like to make fun of him, but he's actually the leading ideologue of this thing.
Yeah.
And I just like to know if you could, talk a little bit about that, because I think that's kind of key to the whole MAGA thing, right?
Yeah.
The resurrection of specifically Confederate politics,
Yeah, I think that's right. So
Confederate ideology.
Yep. So I got those questions. So, one of the things that's really that I don't think, and I talked about Occupy Wall Street and the ideas that were at the heart of it that caused people to organize. And in Occupy Wall Street, I mean, you can't, it's difficult to come out of a number of undergrad institutions without dealing with significant levels of debt. So that's something that a lot of people can experience, can talk about directly, either university debt or medical debt or something, right? Black Lives Matter is actually a different story, where Black people in this room, I bet you every Black person in this room can either talk about a story about the police or has a relative who does, or who could talk about a story. All of us, right? And then some of the people who aren't Black, but that's something that's really Black. I remember looking at a map of the United States. They had a map that talked about where protests were. And I was looking at the Michigan map, because I know Michigan. I was like, you have protests there? Right? Like, because I knew there was all these places in that Black people. I'm like, wait, you got how did that happen? How that happened was through hip hop. Hip hop was the one information source that consistently articulated an argument for Black humanity and against police brutality. It wasn't us. It wasn't Black academics. It wasn't Black novelists. It wasn't Black folk in TV and film. It was Black MCs. Those ideas become durable to the point where a figure like a George Floyd, or a figure like a Michael Brown, or a figure like a Freddie Gray can generate protests everywhere, because everybody could see humanity in these figures because they had been listening to hip hop. How does that connect to DEI? There are all these, we don't talk enough about the intergenerational transmission of capital, and how a part of that capital project I talked about earlier, these folk are dying. They're giving their capital to their kids, and their kids end up being woke. So you've got somebody who's worth millions and millions and millions, and you got a kid who believes Black Lives Matter matters. You've got a kid who's willing to use some of their money to fund that. You've got a kid who's willing to say, you know what, I think I should be taxed. I don't think that all this money you're giving me, I don't think this stuff is right. In fact, if I were actually on the board, I think I would make all types of different decisions that you guys are making, And they're making a decision against that. So it's important when we're talking about DEI and what should be done, it's important we're talking about why DEI is under attack. It's under attack both because it increases the number of folk who aren't white to be in positions of authority, but it's also because of the democratic dynamic that comes when you expose populations to thought that's taught about Black life in a place like the United States. You go back to the Confederacy, what you're asking about, you go back to that Reconstruction era moment, all you got to do is teach the truth. When I'm doing these Democratic backsliding lecture joints, again, I'm speaking as a professor. My politics are plain to see for anybody in the room, but all I got to say is what the literature says. I don't have to make nothing up. I don't have to radicalize. The truth is radical enough. So that's what's happening. Now, what can we do to respond to that? So there are a few levels to it. So as a Wayne State alumnus, for example, you can actually work with other alumni through the New Sigma Foundation. Like his chapter has a foundation that does a lot of dope fundraising work. Like through the New Sigma Foundation, you can organize through other fraternities and sororities. You can organize to make sure that Wayne State, which is a public university, actually stands up for teaching in African American Studies units, in the African American Studies unit and other units. But then one of my fraternity brothers, his name is Fred Sappho. Shout out to Fred if you're watching. Fred Sappho actually was a police officer, and now he has one of the most robust collections of Black history, probably in the state. And he takes that public museum and he goes around and he shares it with folk, and he curates, he talks about the stuff he's bought, right? So at one level, it's about fighting within your institution. It's about fighting, if you're talking about a university, it's about fighting for your institution. But then going back to that idea, I'm a firm believer in using library spaces to teach folk what they need to know. Yeah, so that's that. Mary Sheffield. It's funny because Mary, I know a lot of folk Mary I don't know. What I would say is that it's funny. Okay, so I'm gonna give two arguments. I'm gonna give two responses. So one response is what she should do, right? So what's customary for people to do when they win office is to create some type of website for folk to apply and work for the city. And she did that. In fact, I saw an Instagram post. It was a nice Instagram post. What she should do is select on expertise and imaginative capacity. And that imaginative capacity should have two components. One component is just, I want you to imagine, I want you to imagine the unthinkable. I want you to imagine the undoable, the imagine the unsayable. Like, what are things that we should be able to say we can't say? What are things that we should be able to think we can't think? What are things we should be able to do we can't do because of politics, right? That's one thing. But the other thing, there are all types of laws on the books that people don't use to constrain capital, to constrain philanthropy, to enhance democracy. So if one thing is like to think about what can exist but currently doesn't, the other thing to select on is how can we use the existing legal framework in ways that are legally defensible and uncontrovertible to generate public power, right? So that's, when she's choosing her staff. The other thing, talking a little bit about, going back to Dr. McKissic's concept of ideas, the other thing is she needs another ideational hub. So one hub that's really worked to shift politics rightward in the state of Michigan is the Mackinac Center. So the Mackinac Center is basically the state is probably one of the most powerful state center to right-wing think tanks that we have. And I don't think there is a left version of that exists. And what that does is it hamstrings political officials in as much as the Mackinac Center, they articulate all these things as reasonable, and then you end up just kind of naturally imbibing them. And next thing you know, even if you don't have the politics, you're doing them, right? So the other thing is to cultivate an ideational hub that could be another source of ideas. So that's one thing. But my first thing, and particularly because I don't know her, my first thing is like, okay, so what do we do? I'm living, I'm not even here. But I still think when it comes down to the choice stuff, I still think of myself, as we. Even though my parents live in Redford, I still think of we. The other thing is, what can we do to keep her to account? Right? And that's really important. I talked about Kwame, triflingly earlier. I'll just say this. There's only one way I'm really conservative on crime. I'm conservative on crime when it's white collar crime and when your victims are Black people. Like Kwame was elected to represent Black people and to show us another way was possible. He should have served every year he was given. Now, one of the consequences of racial politics is that it's really hard to use that frame against Black politicians because people, Black politicians still in the state of Michigan, again, they're automatically tagged with the idea that they're corrupt, the idea that they can't govern. But what we have to do is we have to really say, okay, what does Detroit deserve? And then if we believe, as I still believe, that Detroit is going to be, the world is going to be determined in part by what happens in Detroit. Like if you had that type of, if you were choosing and the world was at stake, like what would you have Mary do? And if Mary, I'm sorry, Sister Mayor, if the Sister Mayor, if she veered away from that, what would you tell her if the world was at stake? Right. That requires that we cultivate a certain type of accountability mechanism, a certain type of accountability, and we have that in all these other sectors. It's not like we don't have it; we have to apply it. So that's what I say. The Confederacy. If y'all didn't pick up but one book, thank you for coming. It is so good to see you. I didn't see you in a minute. It's like it's dope. I would actually read a book on that, like a history book on that 1890s period, how the Confederacy starts, that Civil War period. What was the Confederacy actually fighting for? What was at stake in the Confederacy? And what you find is what was at stake in the Confederacy, it wasn't white power, although it was really white power as expressed particularly in the agricultural sector. It was about dominating the most important sector in the Southern economy and extracting for themselves. That's the thing that generates the Jim Crow racial regime, in as much as if it was white domination, that was the aim, and the only way you can get somebody white is to have white women have white kids, then you actually have to create an apparatus to make sure that white women are only in relationship with white men. You have to actually create conditions where democracy, where white and Black populations are as separate as possible. Then you have to create political conditions where at best maybe a few people could vote. And that's the project that they're kind of fighting for now. So we think about so there's another set of conversations about what is America, right? Is America naturally racist? Does America have capacity, et cetera, et cetera? As far as I'm concerned, there are a number of different visions for what America is. That Confederate vision is the most virulent, but is only one of them. The other one is ours, right? The other one is ours. And thank you for bringing that up. I was talking about elections. When Malik asked me about elections, I was really just thinking about the act of electing somebody. I was thinking about electoral culture. What he's getting at is elections determine power. Elections determine governance. So why do I bring that up now? If you look at that Reconstruction moment, it's Black people who passed the first laws for public school. It was Black people who passed the first laws for progressive taxation. It was Black people who said, okay, this democracy is supposed to be much more than what it is. And to that extent, I see another reason, in a way, even thankful that I'm alive in this moment is like, we're in a struggle for democracy, and you need as many Black people with the capacity to understand what that means as possible. Oh, right.
Took the whole time.
Yeah, the whole time.
The whole time.
The whole time.
Thank you all for staying late. I know it's a long evening, but thank you for the questions. Thank you for your attention. And please stay in touch with us. Like I said, our social media, our newsletter. To the folks who had questions about concrete actions, the center will be developing a tool to help people become politically active in their counties, cities, their neighborhoods. So if you stay in touch with us, you can be up to date on the progress of that project and everything else that we do. But thank you again. I hope.
Can y'all do me a favor, give me a shout out? Give them a shout out. So there's a one of the ways, one of the terms that I really dislike. I don't hate it, but I dislike it, is thought leader. Like thought leader, I really dislike that. Like if thought leader was a real thing, and if it was like really important and it did all the work it's supposed to do, it'd be Dr. McKissick.
Thank you. And on that, I will send y'all home. But again, thank you so much for coming. I hope you have a fantastic weekend. You weren't even a quarter of the way through, and Errol sent me some intervention.
Hi, in person, Jeffrey Jones.
Oh my God, it's a pleasure to meet you, man. It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much.
Oh,
That